Hi everyone, I'm Melody Moezzi, the author of several books, including The Rumi Prescription, How an Ancient Mystic Poet Changed My Modern Manic Life, which just came out this March and is available at the library. I'm super excited to share the online conversation I had with California Institute of Integral Studies professor Shoshanna Simons, titled Exploring Rumi to Make Sense of Ourselves, on the Las Vegas, Clark County Library District's YouTube channel, Virtually Anywhere. The host of the conversation was CIIS Public Programs, the Public Programs Department of California Institute of Integral Studies, a nonprofit university in San Francisco. To find out more about CIIS and public programs like this one, visit ciis.edu and connect with them on social media at CIIS Pub Programs. Also, before we start, please remember that you can connect with the Library District at any time 24/7 on their website at lvccld.org, where you'll find tons of great free stuff to enjoy, like ebooks, audiobooks, movies, music, TV shows, e-resources to sharpen your skills, and so much more. Also, if you haven't gotten a library card yet, you don't have one, then sign up for the new digital e-card on their website. And thank you again. I hope you enjoy the program.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. We are so excited that so many of you could join us this evening for Exploring Rumi to Make Sense of Ourselves. I'm Alex Elliott, the Senior Manager of Events and Engagement for the Public Programs Department of California Institute of Integral Studies, a nonprofit university in San Francisco. Before we get started with the conversation, I just want to go over a few things. There is going to be a Q&A this evening after the conversation. You can submit your questions at any time in the chat function on YouTube. We'll be collecting those and we'll give those to the presenters at the end of the conversation. There are a lot of you here tonight, so we'll try to get to as many as possible once we open it up to Q&A. If you have any technical issues, you can also post in the chat. We'll be watching that all night. Now I'm going to introduce our presenters, Melody Moezzi and Shoshanna Simons, and then we will get right into the conversation. Shoshanna Simons is a professor and co-chair of CIIS's Expressive Arts Therapy Program and adjunct faculty in the Transformative Inquiry Department. Her extensive training and experience in the UK and the United States in community-based work with children and families, counseling, education, leadership, and systems change informs her passionate commitment to preparing expressive arts therapy students to transform mental health systems into humane, creative, life-affirming, and culturally responsive communities of practice. Melody Moezzi is a writer, speaker, activist, commentator, columnist, attorney, and award-winning author. Her books include War on Error, Real Stories of American Muslims, and more recently, Haldo and Hyacinths, A Bipolar Life, which earned wide critical acclaim and broke new ground as the first mainstream mental health memoir by either a Muslim or a Middle Easterner. And now it's time to turn it over to Shoshanna and Melody.
Okay. Hi, Melody.
Hey! Long time no see.
Long time no see, like a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
And we had the pleasure to meet over the weekend. And we are both in our homes, and we're also in our little cafe area that we're creating to have an intimate conversation, I'm hoping, in the midst of however many people are tuning in. But I'm appreciating a sense of immediacy with you already.
Me too.
And I'm really looking forward to engaging you in a conversation that your book is such an amazing starting point for what we're sitting with, what's troubling our world right now, and it's affecting all of us. So what incredible timing for this medicine that you have gathered right for right now.
Yeah, I say in the book that the beloved's timing is better than mine and consistently has proven to be better than mine, but only in retrospect do you see that. So I don't see that right now, but come back to me in a year or 5. We'll see.
And maybe by the end of this conversation, we'll
Yeah, who knows?
have made some connections with that. So just in getting us started, I wanted to just say a few things. Well, about one of the things that we talked about in our pre-conversation, I asked you what might be meaningful to you, as a question that I could ask you during this time together. And you said it was really wanting to hear what's meaningful to your readers. And I really took that to heart. And I love the question because it's also an invitation to connect with you, to connect my experience with your experience. And I said right to you right before we got on this cafe, this conversation, was the end of your book felt like the call for the beginning. You know, there's that circularity about it because it's so rooted in your history, the place where all of the parts of you, past, present, and future, come together, and the wisdom of your ancestors. And it's a call, I think, for me as a reader or for any reader to situate this wisdom in our own traditions and our own teachings. I'm inviting that into the conversation.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, thank you.
And maybe that's also something to say to the folks that are listening, that as you all are listening and watching us, to be thinking about how does this connect for you with your own traditions. It really feels like the heart and soul of what's going on. So the other thing, it's the only part of this that feels a little bit structured, is that I wanted to start by sort of imbuing the spirit of these prescriptions into this time with everyone who's tuning in by reading a poem that is attributed to Rumi. And I'm being very careful here because Melody and I spoke about this beforehand. It's attributed to Rumi, but there's some question as to whether it was actually written by Rumi or it's apocryphal, but we do know it's in English and it's in Farsi, and it certainly embodies the spirit of Rumi. So as I read it, I'm gonna just invite everyone who's on this call to arrive. Sometimes being on Zoom, we're sort of a little bit outside of our own bodies. So just like feeling into your own body and also feeling this incredible connection outside of space and time with each other, because again, actually Zoom allows us to be in community without actually being physically co-located. And I'm going to read this poem for us. Only Breath, as translated by Coleman Barks. Not Christian or Jew or Muslim, not Hindu, Buddhist, Sufi, or Zen, not any religion or cultural system. I'm not from the East or the West, not out of the ocean or up from the ground, not natural or ethereal, not composed of elements at all. I do not exist. I'm not an entity in this world or in the next. Did not descend from Adam and Eve or any origin story. My place is placeless, a trace of the traceless, neither body or soul. I belong to the beloved, have seen the two worlds as one, and that one call to and know, first, last, outer, inner, only that breath, breathing human being. So with that, how does this inform, in a nutshell, this book that you've created, knowing that most of the folks here in the call probably haven't read it yet?
Sure. Just to give you a sense of the book itself, I would say this book is not a collection of just translations of Rumi's work. There are translations in each chapter, but the chapters are different diagnoses. I call them diagnoses, but they're basic human emotions, from wanting to depression, to fear, to anger, to disappointment, part of the human condition, right? So each chapter is a different diagnosis and a different prescription or series of prescriptions, focusing on one, which to me seemed to be the prescription that I gleaned from Rumi's work, and not just from Rumi's work, from my father's interpretation of Rumi's work for me, He is very much a Rumi addict, and like most children of addicts, I grew up resenting the object of my father's addiction, being Rumi, and it wasn't until later in my life that I actually came to his work through a series of events I'm sure we'll get into, but effectively losing my mind, and opening my heart, waking up to intuition and shutting down intellect. And when that happened, suddenly this poetry made sense to me that my father had been reciting to me my entire life. So I forget now what the original question was, but I was just giving
exactly that. It was just about realizing that most people won't have read the book. So in a nutshell, what's the pathway that you're opening up to introduce us to? So the first thing that catches my attention is the idea about sanity, some ideas about what does sanity mean. And the fact that your father called you in and brought you in to Rumi as a healing balm, as a wisdom, and as someone who's worked with the mental health system in a kind of against the dominant mental health system my entire adult life. And because I'm in the expressive arts therapy world in particular, I'm really interested and curious to hear how you would compare the medicine of Rumi with the medicine of the more conventional, what we actually formally name as medicine within the mental health field.
So my father is a physician, and the reason I called it the Rumi Prescription is because he actually writes these down as prescriptions for me. But in terms of the mental health system here and so many other places around the world, it's centered on dehumanization. Whereas Rumi is centered on spiritualization. Like these couldn't even be farther apart from each other. Like Rumi says, we're not human, we're spirit. Like we're beyond, there is no self. The self is all connected, is one, right? The system says, oh, you want a self? We'll give you even less than that. The system is beyond dehumanizing. And for me, the immediate recognition of that was being hospitalized and having acute mania within 24 hours of a period of having a beautiful mystical experience. I've had two mystical experiences in my life. This was the second. It was far more intense than the first. And the first had no damaging side effects. The second had a lot, which included acute mania and psychosis. I am so grateful to the medicine that brought me out of mania. I'm so grateful for antipsychotics, specifically because that is a huge part of my treatment, not daily. Very rarely do I take them, but when I need to take an antipsychotic, thank God that those are available to me. I do see them often overused. There was several years back, where one of these antipsychotics was like the best-selling drug in the country, which is crazy because it's meant to treat like a whole separate, like really serious kind of crazy. And we were giving it to everyone. So anyway, the mental health system in terms of how it treats that, putting me in isolation, literally putting me in isolation is a treatment for mania. And every time I say that, I always also have to say, here in the United States, we live in a country where we use, you can call it isolation, seclusion, solitary confinement is what I call it. We use it more than any other country on the planet. We use it for treatment and for punishment. It works for neither. In fact, it's counterproductive. It induces symptoms of mental illness in people who don't already have it. And I know, Shoshanna, based on your work, you know all of this already. Anybody who studies this for just a tiny amount of time knows this. Why our system can't fix it, I have no idea. But that isolation is very much the opposite of what Rumi teaches, is the way that you bring your soul back, the way you wake up. It's not that anything is gone or that you're missing anything, but the way that you wake up to the gold, the beauty, the love, the divine within yourself is not through isolation, but through community, right? Reconnecting. And what we do to people in mental health crises is we disconnect them. And that is a beautiful way to make them sicker. And that certainly happened to me. And not just that, to traumatize them, which is why I'm and I know you are as well, a huge fan of trauma-informed care. what we call culturally competent care, which honestly to me is just listen. I don't expect my mental health provider to know everything about Islam, but I expect when I say something about Islam that my mental health provider, who is not Muslim and doesn't know anything about Islam, doesn't say to me, no, that's not Islam, which happened to me, just listen. It's really not that hard. And I think the human instinct to help is there, but there's a hierarchy, and when it comes to mental health, it's worse than it is in the rest of the medical community, I think, because I had a pancreatic tumor, so I spent a lot of time in the hospital for that, and that was deeply dehumanizing. Nothing compared to the way I was treated in the psychiatric facility. So obviously I have a lot of feelings about that.
Quite rightly so. And it makes me think about how little has changed over the years when it comes to the psychiatric end of the mental health profession. That those things may have shifted in terms of psychotherapy and the services that are available for folks who are in private practice. When we get to state mental hospitals, not so much has shifted. In fact, things are pretty similar. And before, when we had our pre-conversation, I also shared with Melody that why this issue is so important to my heart is because my mother died in a mental hospital withdrawing from prescribed medications. So this is like my life passion, and involves, and it's the heart of my activism and my joy in doing the work is this thread that connects my work with your work, actually. I keep looking away because I've written all these notes and I'm like, oh, we're not on page thing. Something that I wrote exactly about this. I was drawn to some things that you were saying in the book about some definitions of Rumi talking about madness, right? And some of the distinctions that he was making between, kind of ecstatic, crazy. There's a craziness that is about the ecstatic experience. And you use the term in the book, post-ecstatic.
Yeah.
How do you know the difference between post-ecstatic experience and post-traumatic experience? How do you know, what tells you there's a difference?
I don't think there's a difference in terms of what they are. I think there's a difference in terms of how they're expressed and how society accepts them, if that makes sense. I think.
Say a little bit more about that.
So I think the trauma is, so we see trauma as something negative, right? We don't see it as an opening.
Yeah.
We don't see it as an opportunity. And for me, every time I've been broken, whether it was physically with that pancreatic tumor or psychologically with, still physically, mentally, whatever you want to call it, my brain is still physically part of my body. So whether it was with the pancreatic tumor or whether it was with the bipolar disorder, every time I have broken, I have been able to put myself back together in better and more beautiful ways. And I think, and I write it in the book about a friend of mine who I lost to suicide, who I see as the perfect example of this, because she was this wonderful artist on so many levels, and she would put together these gorgeous mosaics as just a reflection of how she, her path to recovery. And though we lost her, she was still such a great, and remains such a great example for me, even in her death, an example of, wow, I can get to a place where I feel like I'm recovered, because she was just like me. Like, she was an advocate, she was a writer, she was an artist. She had this down, she was teaching other people. So I think, like, in her example, for instance, I saw her as somebody I looked up to. And I realized I was so busy looking up to her that I wasn't looking out for her. And for me, for my readers, when they think like, oh, you have, and I'll introduce at events like, oh, she's overcome bipolar disorder, which is bullshit. But I live with it. I didn't need to overcome it. I'm living with it. But that idea that like, oh, you've overcome it and then you don't have to continue thinking about it. Her experience taught me that this is something I'm going to be managing and dealing with for the rest of my life as both a blessing and a curse. And we live in such a binary society that it's very hard for us to recognize that something can be both at the same time. And that goes back to the psychiatric condition of just the clinical experience of having mania and psychosis, which were valid, but also the spiritual experience of having this beautiful mystical experience of ecstatic experience of feeling the connection to every other living thing on the planet in a way I'd never had before. That was valid too. And the medical community should not have told me it was not valid. They shouldn't have told me that it was garbage. And likewise, the faith community should never have told me, don't take your medication, you're just possessed. Like, both of them are fucked up. Like, I don't want either one of these. And why can't we have both? And again, it comes back to our society of living in this binary of, and it has a lot to do with gender. It has a lot to do with race and other things as well. But I do think that's part of it. Yeah.
As you're talking, I'm thinking about the cultural aspects of this, and within the dominant culture of this idea of overcoming, that there is some kind of underneath that, there's an idea of a norm of ways of being and standards of normality that we can actually fit ourselves into, and that we can approximate. Who knows what it is, but it seems to be something to do with the dominant culture. And it seems to be something to do with being able to suppress our emotions and look good on the outside. And I think one of the undercurrents that I hear in your book is that tension, is hearing that tension between that as the medicine. I keep hearing that I'm supposed to be this way, and I keep trying to achieve, and it's always elusive. And then there's your father's voice always coming in, well, you know, here's the medicine, and here's this prescription. And I see you trying that again, but try this one and take on this one. And that coming back, tethering back to this deeper wisdom that the medicine is in the obstacle. Which also translates into Jewish mysticism, which is sort of my, you know, we also established that we were on these parallel cousin paths, which is so sweet. And I'm thinking about a particular person who was diagnosed as schizophrenic that I've had in my life, not in my life. And I remember feeling really concerned that she was talking about these voices that she was hearing. I'm like, oh my God, is she okay? Is she okay? And that's the mental health system conventional part of me. It's like, is she okay? Is she okay? She shouldn't be. Those voices are dangerous. Until I became really curious. And I said, tell me what the voices are saying. Are any of them friendly? And she said, oh yeah, I have these voices. They are so friendly. And they're telling me, you can do it. You can do it. You know, and it's like stepping back and realizing how much we as mental health workers or healers, or however we want to position ourselves, are so much of co-creating either an opening to understand how the diagnosis itself has the potential for wisdom, and how much we are suppressing it because of our own fear.
Yeah, and that's why I called these diagnoses, because I know all of these things that I talk about with pride, like that's, you know, but you calling, like the system calling what I have bipolar disorder is as much a diagnosis as pride to me. I mean, it's a valid and important diagnosis in terms of how much, like what kind of treatments I might or might not pursue. And I believe in that part of it, but I also believe there is so much that we do not know about what I call conditions, what the medical community still likes to call disorders and illnesses. And I still mess up and call it a disorder and illness because it's been internalized as well sometimes. But I've grown to see it as a condition, as something that so right before, frequently I get friends calling saying, I have a friend of a friend who is dealing with so-and-so, their partner who's in the midst of a manic episode or a crisis or whatever. We know you've gone through this and you're functional in society. You're not delusional. You're not jumping off buildings. Like, can you help us in some way? And I just, like, right before we came on, I just got one of these sort of requests, and it's a request by someone who, like, the person we're thinking about is like the most successful person you could ever imagine. And the only reason they need help is because, and like deeply rooted in medicine and the medical community, they need help because there's a secret, you know, like we can't talk about this within our community because there's fear of losing status, of losing position, of losing really valid fears, of losing your job, losing a lot of things. So how does someone like that get help without being brought down and humiliated and dehumanized? And I think there's a way to do it. And it's the same way of like this, what they did to me when I had a pancreatic tumor. No one ever thought to say like, what, this is not even like, just don't tell anybody about it. God forbid someone knows you have, you know, a pseudopapillary tumor of the pancreas, you know, like nobody gave a shit about that.
Right.
But suddenly when it becomes a secret, that's when you invite shame. And shame is just so damaging to the psyche and the soul. Because God made me this way, and there's a reason I'm like this. And it allows me to do the things that I do, the way that I do them. And it allows me to contribute that one unique thing to the world that only I can contribute. And why wouldn't I embrace that? Why wouldn't I celebrate that? Because mainly just because the society I live in refuses to allow me to. And I'm grateful that I was raised by these amazing immigrant Iranian parents who taught me, even though they told me at that moment, be quiet, they had taught me every moment before that. They had said, the world will think less of you because you're a woman, because of the color of your skin, because of your faith, all these bullshit reasons people will have to tell you they think less of you. This will happen to you. They will deeply underestimate you. They are wrong. So because I had that in my head, somebody who had told me before, these are bullshit reasons for people to think less of you, they are not valid. When I was in the psychiatric hospital, and even when my parents said, be quiet about this, I looked at them and I was like, no, this is another one of those reasons. This is no different than me being a woman. This is who I am. And there's no reason for me to be ashamed of it because there's a gift in it. So obviously I feel really strongly about that.
And that comes through so strongly in your story. It's so empowering for me to read it as the daughter of a woman who, in some ways, I saw those qualities in her. And this is, we look generationally back, that at that time, which was, I mean, she passed in 1984, but the issues were the same. But I think there's another piece in your in the book where you talk about, you know, it's in the differences, it's in the neurodiversity that there's the strength. And I saw that quality in her too. I mean, her outspokenness, her ability to, you know, not give a shit in certain situations where other normal people did. If you're already outside of the box, then, you know, there's a certain freedom in that. And there's a certain intergenerational freedom in that. I had a thread that I want to come back to, and it has to do with, again, a bi-ness and the bicultural part of this, which also is something I also identify with. And coming from these super minority communities, you know, where it's important to show a certain face to the world and to have a show of pride and to look a certain way and to bury your dirty washing in, you know, in the backyard. It's dangerous, you know, and I hear that. And I personally was just so struck by the power of your sharing. You were talking about when you were speaking to the Persian ladies, the Iranian Shirzans.
Shirzans,
and
it means lionesses.
The lionesses.
Very strong Iranian woman.
Very strong. And you were this strong Iranian American woman speaking your truth as someone who's out and proud as bipolar, and the power of vulnerability.
Yeah.
The power of vulnerability, and not only the power of vulnerability for you as a woman, but in your specific intersections, which I imagine could be very frightening. I mean, I know it is because you talk about it in the book. How frightening.
Yeah, no, I mean, one of the hardest things, so the first book I wrote was about young Muslim Americans in an effort to fight Islamophobia, specifically, like very overtly. So when I decided to write my second book, which is a memoir about having bipolar disorder, I was like a little nervous about the fact that people are going to say she's Muslim because she's crazy, or she's crazy because she's Muslim. And what's been so great about this third book is it's brought me back to both of them, in the sense that this is a deeply Islamic philosophy that Rumi is promoting, and that philosophy is love. And it's the kind of, and it's madness. It's the saying of, there are two kinds of madness. There is a kind that Rumi promotes, and that is the kind that is rooted in love. And that's what makes a mystic. And then there's the kind that's rooted in fear. And we're seeing a lot of that.
Yes.
Around the world. That this is the kind rooted in fear is in love with borders and walls. Mm-hmm. The kind rooted in love is in love with bridges, right? Unity. And so the one creates a mystic, one creates a lunatic or a fundamentalist, ultimately, yes. Right?
Yes.
And these things both come from a kind of madness. So my hope is, if we're going to get crazy, which all of us are at this point, sorry, like we're living in a country, and it's funny because I know other people who have mental health conditions who are like, don't call Donald Trump crazy. And I'm like, no, he's crazy. He's a fundamentalist. And that's where he fits. And then there's the other side of it where you can find the mystics, right? Those are the people who will pull us out of it. And I promise you, none of them are politicians. Yes. Unfortunately, they're artists, a lot of them. Not that right. I'm biased.
So you've raised the current situation, what we're challenged by right now in this pandemic. And I just went to the book, and I'm looking at that chapter on depression that you wrote and the virus. When your father, I don't know if you have, if you want me to read it, I can just read it.
Sure. Yeah.
So
what page are you on?
We are on page 87.
Okay.
And it's at the heart of what you're really talking about. Is there really such a thing as fixing? Mm-hmm. Or is there really just a path to wholeness through the challenges and the having to come back again and again and again and seeing ourselves as those mosaics that keep getting our pieces moved around and broken and reset into more and more beautiful, unexpected ways. I don't know, would you read it? Would be nice.
Sure. Yeah. Which part? You want me to start at the top of 87?
Yeah. Yeah.
So the poem itself is, yeah. So the poem, this is, I think, the section where I'm talking about the friend of mine who I'd lost to suicide. And I say, and my dad tells me a poem of where there is treasure, snakes come round, where there are roses, thorns abound. In the grand bazaar of life, joy without sorrow cannot be found. And I say, but how does that help, having just lost my friend to suicide? Sure, you can't have good without bad. So what? How does that fix anything? And my father says, it does not fix anything. Only it helps you understand. Nothing can fix this. In this case, losing my friend to suicide, Melody John. And John means dear, but also soul in Farsi. Already you know that, but your friend is not lost. You see her again. Now you have to take care of yourself. Listen to Maulana, which means our master, and it's what we call Rumi in Iran. He says, reciting Rumi as he once again ignores the fact that I'm trying to cancel our lesson and not expedite it. And this is Rumi. For a viable cure, pain is the key. Your injury invites the remedy. In medicine, a cure does not come from nowhere, Ahmad continues. The disease teaches you the cure. Think of the polio vaccine. It comes from the polio virus. And so many vaccines, they work this way. Think of Ebola or smallpox. They can kill all of us. Human being thinks they are so big, so important. But really, you ask any physician and they tell you we are nothing compared to one tiny virus. If you want to stop a virus, you must appreciate its genius. Only then can you learn from it. So, I didn't know how prescient that would be.
Right. Yeah. How are you holding that now? When you read that back now, what comes to you in this circle, right? You started talking earlier about, we don't know what the lessons are. We don't know what got seeded way back when. Are there any connections that you're making now as you read in this moment, those words? Yeah.
No, I think the best thing, there's so much grief around this. And this whole chapter that this is from is about grief. Yeah. And to see that having lost so much life, like it's hard to say to anybody who's lost a loved one, like there's a reason for this. It's very hard to understand that or say that and accept it in any way. But I do think as a society, there's a big lesson we need to learn in terms of how we treat each other as foreigners. When a virus sees no foreigner, there's no foreigner for a virus. There's just a human, and it will take you, and it will come into your cells and replicate. It doesn't care what your background is, despite the fact that people from certain backgrounds are more vulnerable. But that's because of the society we live in, and that we've made these people more vulnerable because they're marginalized in our societies. But reading it now, I definitely. I mean, I know things happen for a reason. There's a lot I learned from virology in general during the writing of this book. And there's a lot of virology that's in the book, oddly enough. I don't believe in coincidences. I'm sure it happened for a reason. But I won't say that, like, when I realized my book was being released in the midst of a pandemic, that I was like, great, we need this. I was not excited. When my publicist at Penguin was like, we're all working from home, I was like, no, please keep working. When they were like, we can't mail your books out to people, sorry. Like, all of that, I just thought, or when Amazon was like, we can't mail books for weeks instead of 2 days, right? We got so used to receiving things as quickly as we needed them. And then suddenly there's scarcity, you know. But all the lessons that I learned and keep learning throughout the book keep popping up during this experience. And I wrote the book, like all of my books, I write the book that I need. And I really needed this earlier in my life. I wrote the book that I needed earlier, but now I'm finding a lot of comfort in it right now. Not because I've reread it, because I haven't, but because my readers keep coming back to me and reminding me. And my dad keeps coming back to me. He's like, well, you said this in chapter whatever, like you have the wisdom. And ultimately that's the lesson of this book. It's not a specific piece of wisdom. It's the knowledge that wisdom is already within you. And you don't need to purchase anything to get it. Right. You don't need to go anywhere to get it. Right. Rumi has a poem where he says, why seek pilgrimage at some distant shore when the beloved is right next door? Right now, we can find the beloved at home, literally.
Exactly.
At home.
I was just thinking, like, following this through its logic. Yes, this is when your book is being published.
Yeah, of course.
How brilliant is that? How amazing is that? There's nothing to be done. The books will arrive when they arrive. And look at us. Look how amazing an opportunity it gave for us to be here in our living rooms. Yeah. With however many people distributed throughout, who even knows where, and I have no idea who's here.
Yeah,
but I know the IIS in one location in San Francisco, we wouldn't be reaching so many people in our conversation.
Yeah, across borders, right?
Across borders, right? That virus. Thank you. Not to thank you, virus, for your for the illness, but for bringing us together.
And that's what trauma does, and that goes back to your work, I think, because your work is so based in that these crises, these horrible events in our lives are opportunities. Yes, and we can see them that way, and there are opportunities to reconnect. Exactly. With our own, and this notion of intergenerational trauma is so prevalent. Like we talk about it a lot, and it's totally valid, but I wouldn't be alive if it weren't for intergenerational resilience. My parents survived that shit, like the fact that they made it here, and that I'm still here despite revolution and war and imperialism. We still made it through that, and we're still here. So there's a way of not focusing on the trauma, or at least using the trauma to bear out that resilience. Absolutely. In our program, we have a very strong emphasis on what we call collective practices. And it's I think all of us in our core faculty are from more collectivist kinds of backgrounds. So it's somehow in the DNA of the we.
And it's thank goodness, because we need the we in all of this. This is, you know, this, if this wakes us up to the fact that their individualism is a figment of our imagination.
Yes.
I don't know what else would, you know, as you say, this invisible virus, it will take us all down. It can take us all down. And yes, it affects us in different ways, and according to our social positions that pre-existed this, and it's revealed.
And it can wake us all up too.
And it can wake us all up. And the other connection I made with this, with the idea of the prescriptions, which I love, that it's, you know, Rumi's prescriptions, is there's a trend that's I think originated out of the UK, where I'm originally from, of social art on prescription now, that's coming out of.
Really?
Yes. And it's funded, and it's happening that the doctors are giving arts and social prescriptions instead of medications, or in addition to medications.
Yeah.
And how brilliant that is, and how it felt like your work is really congruent with that, and the larger culture, the shift towards thinking about arts and what's life affirming as the prescription, rather than the medication, which is about suppression of symptoms. You know, how do we manage symptoms but allow for joy? How do we do both of those things? It's not about the buy, it's about the integration.
And it's, I think for me, the best treatment, separate from just love, but the best treatment for me has been insight. And that's those calls that I keep getting from people. It's from people who have family members who refuse to acknowledge that they have a condition that needs some sort of treatment. However they want to treat it, because they've been told, this is a condition you'll have for the rest of your life. You'll have to take this medication for the rest of your life. Like you're told this stuff, as opposed to, this is a condition we don't understand at all. We don't know what causes it. We have no idea why the medications that work and don't work and don't work. Some work a lot better and worse than others. Some actually induce the symptoms of the things we're trying to treat. You know, but just be honest with me. And that lack of honesty, and that sort of patriarchal attitude of like, we know what this is, when you absolutely don't know. And what I love about my current psychiatrist, I actually wrote a piece years ago in the New York Times about him, where I said, like, what impressed me most about, and this is like a Harvard and Yale educated psychiatrist, and what impressed me most about him in that first meeting was how many times he said, I don't know. Because I never heard a psychiatrist say that, right? Yes. And that's all I needed to hear. I didn't need the answer. I just needed him to be like, I don't know, we don't know, you're a human being, let's treat you.
Yes, exactly. Right. We have a phrase in our program, I don't know, but together we do. And we've started doing it as a mantra for the students that come in, to say it to each other when, help me, what's wrong with me? I don't know, but together we do. It's something about that collaboration and a real trust that it's the person who's sitting in front of us who has the wisdom, if we can hold the space for them to feel into all of that brokenness. And that's where the arts come in, because we can externalize, we can put into art, we can put into movement, we can put into poetry, writing. You know, you taught creative writing in psychiatric units, which is another whole thing I'm not sure we're going to have the time for, but I'd love to talk about it offline. So to not lose a couple of really things I really wanted to get to. One of them was, this, you know, what is it about now? And there's been a movement in the last maybe 10 years towards this sort of reclaiming our ancestors, reclaiming ancestral wisdom, feeling the thinness of the conventional health system, that there's really been a trend towards that. And it's also revealed the limitations of the United States homogenization process. So we find that there's, for a lot of our white students from European backgrounds, feel that they have this idea that they don't have a culture. And
so they run off to an ashram.
Run off to an ashram or adopt, you know, it's that line between, where's the line between universalism and particularism? Where's the line between leaning into Rumi's poetry and, you know, I don't know what it might be.
Well, you know, the way I see it, it's whatever brings you close to the beloved, take it. But what I see is Rumi is the fastest path for me, because I am Persian through and through. I'm Muslim. Like I have the same background as he does. I speak the same language. That's where I come from. And if my father were not Persian and not in love with Rumi, then I would have written this book about another mystic, right? Like somebody else, because every culture has them. And my point in writing this book was, and I say toward the end of it, that I'm not writing this book to tell you my story.
Yes.
I'm writing it to encourage you to tell yours.
Yes. Thank you for that. I was going to ask you to read that piece out, because that was like the beginning felt like, the end felt like the beginning. Like, I love that you ended with that, because it really was that invitation and that sense that it might be painful to unveil the past stories, but it's important. Again, it's like those stories might be ones of finding that your ancestors were oppressors. That's
right.
But it's what's in the truth. And again, what's in the healing that happens through that journey and digging back beyond that as
and
well.
owning it, whatever it is, really owning it. And if you do have oppressors in your history, then figuring that out, I mean, there are ways to, I do think that we carry other generations within us, and we work out their traumas within us.
Yes,
and
exactly.
if you have old generations that were oppressing others in really harsh ways, and you are damaged in one way or another, could it not be that your line needs to pay some reparations? And when you do, that's how you get healing. We don't understand in our society that like antidepressants don't always, we call antidepressants drugs. But sometimes the best antidepressants are actions. And the argument is when you're that depressed and there is a deep level of depression where you can't act. But the only time that I've ever attempted suicide was after taking an antidepressant that gave me the motivation to act on my emotions. Depression is not a problem for me, because without any motive, like I'm not motivated, I won't do anything. So the drug actually induced the thing that it was supposed to prevent, so at the same time, there are drugs that have saved me and pulled me out of it, but you have to use them consciously and thoughtfully and engage in a partnership with someone else as an equal, as opposed to a patient who must be patient.
Yes.
And not ask questions,
Such an important point to remember. And I'm involved right now with a project through the North American Arts and Health Organization, which is a healthcare, it's working with healthcare providers. Actually, you might be really interested in hearing about this nationally. And actually, there are international movements as well. But we're currently working on a project that's raising money for helping healthcare professionals who are struggling so much. And a lot because of this having to be the experts, having to have it all together, when in fact, so many healthcare providers are having to make ethical decisions that feel unethical, that are hurting their soul. And there's nowhere to discuss it or talk about it. So what we're trying to do is raise money to create arts-based practices as medicine for healthcare workers. So this idea of healthcare workers as artists and as creators.
I love that.
It's very exciting. And I think it's also it follows what you're saying. And also the story of your friend who you talked about. It seemed like there was so much pain that because she was seen as being so together or such a presence for other people, her own pain went unnoticed. And I think this is a moment when we're seeing that frontline folks are the people who are doctors, nurses, janitors, healthcare, shoppers, people who are working in shops, are the people who are getting this disease, and they were never credited before. And how do we create spaces of health?
And the people who are keeping us alive are the people who are making less than minimum wage. Like these are the people who, if you think this has nothing to do with labor, like this has everything to do with labor, hopefully this will force us to recognize that these are valuable people doing valuable work that needs to be compensated accordingly. And unless those of us who are purchasing that actually stand up for them, then it's not going to happen. We really need to acknowledge that these people saved our lives by driving food to our house, by working in the supermarket.
These are new conversations that this virus has actually made possible.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. I know we don't have a lot of time left, so I wanted to get to another part of the book that stood out for me, because again, we're saying this is what stood out for me, and it was about, it's because I work in a school, I'm an educator, I'm in higher education, and this question, this juxtaposition sometimes between anger, righteous anger, right, and social justice and righteous anger somehow go together, and then there's compassion and love on the other hand. And I identified with that both personally in my own journey, my own sort of adolescent rebellious voice, which can be very uncompassionate, and my own evolution, and then seeing that often in my students. And really hearing that I love that chapter about love and anger. And there's a piece that amused me when you talked about being an ally in the queer Muslim conference.
Yeah.
And you talked about meeting your pseudo doppelganger. Well, I love the phrase. And how hard that was. Can you say a little bit about?
So I was invited to this amazing organization. I encourage y'all to look it up. It's called Masjid, the Muslim Alliance for Sexual and Gender Diversity. And I was invited to do this mental health workshop for like 2 hours. Not knowing that I was the only straight cisgender person coming with my husband, a straight white cisgender man. So sort of invading the space in a way, but I didn't know that that was happening. I just knew that I was invited, and I showed up because this is a community that, for my writing, I've received death threats. And the only death threats I've ever received were for this being part of the queer jihad movement, fighting for LGBTQ rights from an Islamic perspective, and being insistent about that. So I earned my place there, right? Like I had earned my place there as an ally. But even still, I was so righteous about my allyship. I thought I was so good at it, and I knew what I was talking about. And at the end, there was a woman who looked just like me and came up to me and was like, really unhappy with the ways I use the word crazy, which is the way the dictionary uses it. But she was unhappy with that. She was unhappy with all these other things. And as she was talking, I just noticed that physically I was distancing myself from her. And she looked so much like me that it was so obvious that, and the thing that was, and I started getting so angry, and it wasn't that I was angry, and I not that I showed it to her, but within I was just seething, and it was all ego. I realized that there's no righteousness to any of this anger right now, because she's entitled to the space to herself. She's entitled to feel like I'm invading it because I am. She's entitled to have her opinions about what I have to say. And I would defend them on any other day if I weren't me standing here. You know what I mean? But my ego is like getting in the way of all of this. And my father's take and Rumi's take is all of anger, so much of anger. I don't buy that all of it, because I'm still a big fan of Audre Lorde. I think anger has uses. But I also think that so much of our anger is from ego. We're angry not because the right thing is not happening, but because the thing we want is not happening. The thing we think is right is not happening. And I see that in the lack of conversation across political parties in this country right now, especially.
Yes. She also struck me as your doppelganger. I don't know if you meant, maybe you did mean this in this way, in that I hear in the book you struggling with your own righteous anger, right? And your own experiments in leaning into Rumi wisdom, like you describe, oh, you don't look like a Muslim, that that whole part. And you checking yourself and like, well, I'm not going to go into what my normal rap would be around this. So I was also thinking about her as your doppelganger and like mirroring back, her righteous indignation at you. That's also part of ego.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I didn't intend to write it like that, but I'm glad that you got it. I'm glad it showed up.
That's how I kind of read it. Yeah. It reminded me of a time when I was in Boston, and I was out with who I thought was a friend, a male guy.
I thought this is going to somewhere great. Who I thought was a friend. Great.
I thought he was inviting me out wanted to get to know me. I met him at a conference. He was a mental health worker, and we were hanging out. And then he asked me out for a date. I'm like, but I have a girlfriend. And he said, you don't look like a lesbian. And I was not as evolved as you at the time. I said to him, really? I thought you were gay. Which wasn't really true.
Which wasn't,
but
you know, it got.
I was not in my higher power at that moment. But
I love it.
So we just have, we have 5, I think we have 5 minutes. A breath.
Yeah.
A breath. Let's see, where are we now? Where are we now? And where are we in the relation to the mystery in this moment? I'm saying the mystery in terms of that was one of the things we wanted to invite in terms of Rumi, where just let it unfold. You know, where are we now? Where's this conversation taken us?
My during all of this, while we were talking, other things are happening around me. My cat is sitting right here. Touch your cat. My husband is over there. Our neighbor knocked on the door recently to be like, it is pouring rain downstairs and your passenger window is open. You may want to pull it up.
You've managed that all incredibly well.
Oh yeah, all of that happening. But you ask in this moment, I'm thinking like, I can't believe I left the window down in the middle of a storm. I don't know, something about leaving the window down in the middle of a storm is striking me. Yeah. Anyway, that's what I'm thinking about. That's what's hitting me right now. And no damage was done. My husband went and pulled it up and it was okay. It wasn't that.
Sitting through it.
Yeah. Sitting through it.
And it really didn't seem from the outside like any storm was hitting.
Well, thank God for the neighbor, because it would have been open all night, right? So the beloved is right next door and comes upstairs and knocks sometimes to say, hey, you were kind of dumb when you parked your car today.
Mm-hmm. Well, because we have a couple of minutes, and I wanted to go back to the end of your book, which felt like the beginning. Maybe to actually do that, pull out the page that I found. If I can give you the page, can you read it?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
It is page 234, where you're talking about trading intellect for intuition from there.
Mm-hmm. Sure. So this chapter is about pride and ego. That's the diagnosis here. Trading intellect for intuition by accepting my father's guidance while filling Rumi's prescriptions for myself, and prioritizing love above all else, I am slowly learning to quit reducing myself to my thoughts and achievements, to quit comparing myself to others' carefully curated Facebook personas, to quit striving for perfection to the point of creative stagnation, and to quit chronically trusting reason over fate. By returning to my roots, to my parents, to my heart, to the beloved, I have discovered a newfound sense of love and gratitude for where I come from, personally, culturally, and spiritually. Applying that to myself and the world around me by filling Rumi's prescriptions has helped me reduce the wanting, insecurity, ego, and ambition that first led me on this journey. In the process, it has also mercifully reignited my creative spark, bringing me back from a madness far more common and insidious than manic depression, back from the trappings of my ego, back from fear and insecurity, back to the joy of creating for its own sacred sake, not my own errant egocentric one.
That seems like a really great place to leave this.
Yeah. Thank you so much for this conversation. I had such a great time.
Thank you too. Me too. Let's see what questions we have coming for us. Okay, questions. Could you please comment on the role of emotions and seemingly growing pressure buy-in for false positivity, a pressure that is distancing from authenticity of the human experience?
Just be positive. Is that pressure? I see that pressure, not just with positivity, but with productivity too. Like, I think it's noxious, it's toxic. Because it's not like, if you don't authentically feel, and I write about it in the book, if you don't authentically feel your emotions, you can't get through them. Rumi has a poem where he says, honey is only sweet because you've tasted vinegar. You won't know the difference otherwise, right? And the idea that like somebody with manic depression, like I have this sides of joy and depression apparently higher than a lot of so-called normal people, and I can go lower than a lot of so-called normal people. And guess what? I can still survive it. And I can tell you that those different planes of reality have all taught me something too. And feeling them has taught me something, and fighting them. Every time I tried to run away from them, they got worse. And one of the things that my father, and I write about in the book, says specifically is that crying is the best sedative on earth. There are no side effects. There's there's nothing, but you go to a psychiatrist. I've never had, other than the great one I'm with now that I was saying I wrote about, who actually was like, no, just cry. It's okay. Like, go. And I remember being in one of these facilities where I was teaching and being livid because one of the patients, who is an inpatient psychiatric on a locked ward with no windows, by the way, no music, no beauty, no nothing, sitting in this ward, and she's crying. And this health tech says to her before my writing workshop begins, says, if you keep crying, I'm going to have to take you to your room. You won't be able to partake in this workshop. And I lost it on this health tech to the point that I'm glad that they didn't keep me in there, because I was like, no, why are you stopping her from doing the one thing that's going to help her? You just pumped her full of these drugs that are killing her, and you're not letting her do the one natural thing her body knows to do. And I insisted that she sit there, and we sat with her. And to me, that's the kind of thing that we need to do, is just actually feel those emotions.
Yes. And thank goodness you were there in that case. And all the times that this suppression of emotion, this natural healing process is being suppressed.
In a psychiatric hospital of all places.
In a psychiatric hospital. And if this wisdom, the wisdom of the mystics is exactly that, and it seems to be across traditions. There's a teaching in Jewish mysticism, you have to descend to ascend. You have to go down to come up. It's like this everything is about calling it bipolar, rather than it's about the integration of opposites. And so much of the mystical teachings, I think, in all the three, well, not just in the three monotheistic mystical traditions, has to do with that integration rather than the fear and separation. And I actually, I didn't ask you this question, but I was thinking about Iranian American, like that bipolarity of what is the American voice? What is the American voice doing to the Iranian voice?
I often say I'm 100% Iranian, 100% American, because that's exactly how I feel. And I've had so many, don't read the comments, but I read the comments sometimes, and people are just viciously scared of that possibility. And I love how much it scares people, because it's like, no, I'm both of these things.
As if we have to keep.
Right. And it's just, it ruins it ruins all those borders and boundaries, and I'm all about doing that. And that's the reason that, that's the reason I'm such a, an ally to the LGBTQ community, or any community who I see being seriously marginalized to the point that they're, as a lawyer, especially, it makes me upset to see that basic human rights.
Another one. Right?
Exactly. A lawyer, artists. They work together, I promise.
We can see that for sure. Okay, next question. You mentioned in your book that we keep forgetting our wisdom. How can we get better at remembering?
Should have reminders all around you.
Okay.
Seriously, literal reminders is something that's been helpful to me. Like women who, or men who wear yarmulkes, or women who cover their hair, it's not about the fabric, it's about having a physical reminder, or even a necklace or whatever, something that's physical. We're such physical beings, and we're so tied to that, that it helps, I think, to have something outside of ourselves, and to what personally, like when I pray, I often find myself praying inside my own head, and I've had to try really hard to pray out loud, because when I'm inside my own head, there's room for thoughts to trickle in. But when I'm speaking right now, like I can't think of anything other than what I'm saying to you right now. It's easier. So when I'm speaking to God, why should it be any different? I should be more focused, not less. So I don't know. I hope that helps somewhat, but I think it's different for everyone. But I do think like having something physical, like
tangible
and
reminder.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm curious what it was like for Melody to decide to be public with her diagnosis.
You know, as an activist, it was not a huge decision. I realized that this is a group of people who are being discriminated against. Now I'm a member of this group. Shit, right? But I didn't know how bad the discrimination was until I was in the hospital, where I realized, oh my God, I've lost every ounce of credibility I've ever had. All of my medical records from this, like one of my facilities I was at, over and over, they had written like, patient has delusions that she's an author and a lawyer. Like, they don't even think you can do the things you've already done. And then when I left that facility, I was told to like lower my expectations for my life because I would never amount to anything. Meanwhile, this was the same hospital where they, you know, at the end of my records, when I'd been threatening to sue them the whole time I was there, like they crossed off the part where it's like patient believes she's an author and a lawyer. They just crossed off believes, like, oh, oops, patient is an author and a lawyer.
Like
not that it matters. Yeah, not that it matters, but the point is, if your job is to help me distinguish between delusion and reality, you can't bother to Google me to like figure it out, or ask my parents or ask my husband.
So actually, it's sort of, they were delusional about the possibility.
Yeah, because they don't think we're capable.
Of delusional disorder, delusional psychiatrist disorder was operating for them at the time. The two must be mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
It's been said that Rumi is the founder of the Whirling Dervishes. If that's so, he used movement to reach ecstatic states. Could you comment on the link between movement and mystic states? Great question.
Yeah. I'm a hooper. Is there any other hoopers here? Hello, we're together. I hula hoop.
Okay.
I have a hoop on my wall right now. If I turned, I could technically turn. Can you see my hula hoop?
No. Oh, yes.
There, you can see it.
We can see it.
But light shining in my face, so you can't. But so I'm a hooper, and I'm a big fan of the spinning motion as well, because it tends to work for me. But I think movement and music, and we actually Shoshanna wisely wanted to start this whole session with music so that we could pull ourselves out of our left brains a little bit. But yeah, so this isn't something, it's funny, like talking about stuff that's not supposed to be intellectualized, it's supposed to be felt.
Right.
And the way that you feel it is through getting out of your thoughts and not thinking. And that movement allows you to do that, and it allows you to express joy. I'm a big fan of dance as well, and music. Obviously, I have no talent for it because the curse of being named Melody is that you have no talent for music, but I love it. I love it anyway.
So what's your Rumi prescription for folks living alone in quarantine, which can feel like the solitary confinement you're talking about? I bet you have a chapter on isolation.
Yeah, I do. Chapter 2. First off, please remember this feeling. There's someone right now, and as bad as it is, you're in your home, you have a clock, you have access to music, you have access to poetry, to art, to different things that when I was in isolation, when all the people who are sitting right now in solitary confinement in this country don't have access to any of that. Feel that fully, feel what that's like, and take action when we get out of this, because we shouldn't be it's torture what we're doing to people. I spent one day in solitary, and I still have nightmares about it. Wow. So one, let that bring your empathy out and your action out, so that when this ends, you say, this is not okay to force onto other people. We will not do this to human beings. recognize that we are social beings. Do not do this to people. So that's separate. We're connected. That's separate. But in terms of what he says, the cure for isolation is its community. And how do you build community when you can't be with somebody else, right? It's within your own heart, within the beloved within you. And for me and for so many others, the way that you find that is through creating. Rumi's solution to isolation is to invent, not to imitate. Often, in order to build community, we try and be like someone else. We try and imitate someone else so we'll fit into that community. And Rumi says, don't. Rumi says, you have something valuable that's specific to you. Do that thing. Create that thing. Create that art, whatever it is, whether it's music, whether it's needlepoint, whether it's, you know, chocolate mousse, whatever it is that you can create and bring yourself to create, do that. And do it even if you're not good at it. Do it especially if you're not good at it, because when you're not good at it, you're able to pull the ego out of it and you're able to do it just for the joy of it. So for me, my treatment of isolation is never in writing, because writing is work for me, even though it's also prayer for me. It's work, it's hard. And I'm specific about the way I want my writing to sound, and I edit, you know, but when I sing, I don't care, because I'm not trying to sing for anybody. No one's going to record it. No one cares. It's horrible. I'm so bad at it, but I love it. So create that. Sing however you sing. And Rumi has another poem where he says, though the song of the nightingale you may learn to compose, you'll never know what it sings to the rose. Don't learn someone else's song. Sing your own song. So
beautiful.
Yeah.
In your book, Melody, you mentioned that you cannot go into the women's prayer area in the mosque. How do you personally integrate the divisive nature of Islam in this?
So in the United States, I can't. In most mosques, I can't. In Iran, actually, there are mosques where I can. Ask a question of why that would be. You think of Iran as being backwards and whatever else people think about Iran, but no, I have been in integrated mosques with men and women in Iran. I have never been in that situation in an official mosque in the US. That personally, my belief is that who is our closest ally in the Middle East outside of Israel is Saudi Arabia. Their money, so Iranian money can't make its way into the US in the same way that Saudi money can. There is influence on these mosques. That's why I also encourage people never to, it hurts me when I think of somebody saying, I'm going to a mosque to learn about Islam. And I think it would hurt Rumi to say, I'm going to anywhere other than a mountain or an ocean to learn about God. You know, why? God doesn't need a house to be built for it. So that, I think, and there's nothing divisive about Islam. Islam means peace. It's about unity. It's about love. What's divisive is how some Muslims interpret it, in the same way that there's nothing divisive about Christianity, but there is something divisive about the way the KKK interprets Christianity, for instance, right? Or in any, you know, this could be applied to any faith. And in terms of the gender divisions, it's worth remembering within Islam that there would be no Islam if it weren't for Khadija. So coming to madness. So the Prophet Muhammad received the revelation, it's Ramadan, so received the revelation of the Quran supposedly in this month. And when he did, when it was the angel Gabriel revealed the Quran to him, he ran to his wife Khadija, who was much older than him, who was his boss, who was the most powerful businesswoman in Mecca, who probably couldn't exist in modern day Saudi Arabia. He ran to Khadija. He said, I've lost my mind. And Khadija said, no, this is a new religion. And Khadija became the first convert to Islam. So without that woman, there would be no Islam. And all of the faiths, ultimately, without women, they would not exist.
That's right.
But she was the first convert, right? Like, and she's lost in history. So I think going back to that history, and then the sadness of thinking Khadija could be in the, 6th, 7th century, working on the numbers, but 700. to be in the 7th century, to be in Saudi Arabia and being able to be the most, like, a businesswoman, a really functioning businesswoman, where right now it's not entirely possible to do that as a woman in Saudi Arabia. So we haven't evolved quite as much as you would hope on both sides. And I think we also have to remember that the American money that keeps going into Saudi Arabia, that also, you know, fosters the destruction and the murder of Yemeni children, for instance, and the gender apartheid that exists in that country. There's a lot of American money and American weapons that are going there. And as Americans, if I'm assuming this question is an American because we're in America, but that's a bad assumption to make. So if you're an American, those of you who are, let's remember it's our country that's supporting this version of Islam, the Wahhabi version of Islam, which is not Islam at all, but a serious perversion and a politicization of a faith that nearly a quarter of the population has. So it's an easy thing to use to manipulate people, but it's not Islam.
Great, thank you. There's 2 more questions. Would you feel comfortable talking about how you met your husband and got married in the midst of living with depression, bipolar? I often think I'm too busy healing to invite a journey partner.
So I didn't invite a journey partner. I think when you look for something, it's hard to find, but if you're not looking for it, it's when it finds you. I met my husband when we've been married almost 20 years now. I met him my first year of college. I had no intention I had never really dated. And I was busy. I had other things to do. After that pancreatic tumor, I almost died. So I had books to write. I had things, and at that time I wasn't even had books to write. I had, war criminals to prosecute. I had things I really wanted to do that, I didn't think a partner would help me do that. I was wrong because I happened to meet my husband. The way I met him, he was a year ahead of me. We both went to Wesleyan, which is this like super artsy fartsy liberal arts school in Connecticut. And he just ran after me when I was leaving the library one day and was like, I noticed you. And I noticed you noticing me. And I'm like, I was not noticing you. I was like reaching for my mace. He was very much like, he asked me out and actually got my phone number. And I told him that I would never date him. He told me his closest friend at school was another Iranian girl. And there were very few Iranians at the school. And I knew of her and I wanted to meet her. So I used him to get to her, and we became best friends, me and Roxana. And then I stayed friends with Matthew for a couple of years before we ever started dating. We were friends. We never really dated. We were living in the same house by the time we started dating. So it sort of evolved. It wasn't something I looked for. It was something it was the greatest gift that has ever been given to me by the beloved, for sure.
So maybe the punchline is you don't have to wait to be invited.
Yeah.
That just happened.
Yeah. And I will tell you, I was, of all my friends, I was the least one who ever wanted to partner up with anybody.
Okay, there's 2 more questions. What does Rumi say about the healing qualities of sound?
What does Rumi say? I mean, there's a lot of songs of, like the Song of the Nightingale, for instance. Like there's songs of animals, of birds. Music is the thing is, it's not even what he says about the healing of qualities of sound. It's this poetry. The word sher, poem in Farsi is sher, which also means song. So this poetry is not, again, it's not meant to be like read while sitting. It's meant to be sung while spinning. You don't read this poetry, you sing it. There's a reason it's rhyming couplets. That's why it was so important to me in the book to keep the rhyming. That's the reason people memorize it, is because it's easy to memorize because there's all of the rhyming. And it's often set to music, to drums and to flutes. And his primary, he starts off his masterpiece, the Masnavi, about the song of the reed flute torn from the reed bed. And this song of being torn from the one, torn from whether, you know, in a broader sense, torn from the beloved and put into this human body on this earth, and always wanting to go back to the reed bed. But the beauty of the reed flute is it can only make music because it's empty. And this is a lesson for us with all our thoughts in our head. The most beautiful things we're able to make is when we're empty and the beloved comes through us, not when we fill ourselves up and, you know, collect stuff, which we're really good at.
Lovely. So, do you have a favorite Rumi poem?
So it's favorite in the sense that this is my mantra. When I feel like I might not be good enough, or when I'm in an interview situation where I feel like I'm being judged in any way, the poem in Farsi is Zar talab gashti khud awwal zar budi. And I translated it as, you went out in search of gold far and wide, but all along you were gold on the inside. Beautiful. So that helps me to be like, I'm fine, I'm all right.
That image is such a strong image to be able to come back to as well. That gold on the inside.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So that's our time. So it's time to
thank you so much.
Up.
Thank you for those beautiful questions. I
Wonderful
really appreciated
questions.
it.
And Alex, we're going to invite you back.
Thank you so much. That was so beautiful to listen to. It was really fun to watch.
Thank you, Alex.
So much for being here tonight.
Thank you so much.
I will go ahead and make you disappear. Bye. And thank you to everybody who watched tonight, who attended. We hope you'll join us for more of our upcoming events. Our next one that's coming up is Missed Translations, an online conversation with Sopan Deb and Alka Aurora on June 3rd at 7 p.m. US Pacific time. We posted the link in the chat if you want to learn more. This conversation was recorded tonight. If you'd like to watch it again or share it with your community, you can find it at this same link on YouTube or on our Facebook page. And I believe we're linking to those in the chat as well. We will also feature this talk on our podcast, which you can find at www.ciispod.com or by searching CIIS public programs on your favorite podcast app. Thank you again for joining us and have a wonderful evening.